Welcome to episode 44 of the Tax Professionals podcast. This episode shares the experiences and advice of 3 successful female tax professionals in support of International Women's Day 2022.
Welcome to the Tax Professionals podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your tax career. Here's your host, Jack Bonehill.
A few months back, I was speaking to Kate Rothwell, in-house head of tax at AO, who thought it would be a good idea to do an episode for International Women's Day 2022. I hadn't even realised that International Women's Day was coming up, and when I thought about what topics we could cover, I realised that, outside of the obvious, I was naive in relation to the challenges and issues that women face in their tax careers, to the extent I went to Google for some help. If it wasn't for my conversation with Emily, Adele and Jenny, I would still be fairly naive. Their experiences surprised me. What I thought would be a big issue turns out not to be, and something that I didn't realise was an issue is an issue. The episode covers the following topics: introductions from our guests, having children and a career, as well as working part-time more generally, and related advice at around 7 minutes 15, pay inequality and how to avoid this at roughly 28 minutes 15, feeling disadvantaged for being female and action taken by our guests at around 38 minutes 15, and the final topic is achieving success for females in a male-dominant profession at around 49 minutes. The discussion has definitely given me great insights, and the advice shared by Emily, Adele and Jenny within this episode is great for women and actually for men too, to help tackle the issues. Make sure you don't miss any future episodes of the podcast by subscribing or signing up for email notifications at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/subscribe. The email notifications will give you a brief summary of each episode so you can decide if you want to listen. Episodes are bi-weekly and are released on Mondays. Before we get into the episode, I just want to mention this. When I graduated, my first job choice was to be an actuary, with working in tax as a close second. And even though I've enjoyed all my tax roles, it wasn't until I became CTA qualified that I decided tax was where I wanted to stay. With tax, there's so many different roles and places to work. They all provide something a bit different, and while that's great, it's meant I've spent a lot of time thinking about what areas of tax I want to work in and where I want to take my career long term. I've been caught up in my own thoughts. I've had doubts. I've been unsure. What's been most useful for me is talking to others, saying what I'm thinking, having someone listen, and hearing their advice. The tax recruitment company understands this and can help you with a free career coaching chat with them. They have over 60 years experience in the sector. They can help you explore the options, they can help you decide what's best for you, and they can help you to create a plan to transform your tax career, making you feel more content and happier in your life. You can book a free, no obligation call with them by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/free career chat. That's thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/free career chat. Thanks to the tax recruitment company for sponsoring the podcast, which is helping me to continue creating episodes. Without further ado, let's get into the episode. So do you want to go first, and Emily? Do you mind giving us a little bit of an introduction about you, I suppose, particularly from a professional perspective?
So Emily Burnside. I'm the tax manager at AO. I've been here for 6 years and I'm responsible for all taxes across all jurisdictions. So prior to joining AO, I used to work I've worked at EY and PwC, where I specialised in corporate tax. So I did the ATT route and then CTA whilst I was at PwC. That's kind of my experience so far.
So my name's Adele Hickling. I work at EY and I am an EY lifer. I joined in the graduate scheme 11 and a bit years ago now. Gosh, that's really such a long time. And I've just worked my way up. I'm now a director in the transaction tax team. So I focus on corporate M&A activity, advising companies on buying and selling other companies.
I'm Jenny. I started my career in tax back in 2007. So I started on a KPMG graduate scheme in corporate tax. I did 3 years in that before specialising in research and development tax credits, and that's what I specialise in now. So 12 years pretty much doing research and development tax credits with a mixture of Big Four experience. So I've kind of I was at KPMG, moved over to EY, and then did a kind of back and forth again between those two firms. CTA and CA qualified, and I met both Emily and Adele at my first stint at EY, which started in 2012. So at the moment, I just finished with EY a couple of weeks ago, and I'm due to start with the Deloitte Global Incentives team in May.
And you don't just do tax, do you, Jenny, as well? Haven't you got a bit of business on the side as well?
Yeah. So in 2016, I set up Honey Blossom Bridal. So that's a wedding dress boutique in South Manchester. And that's when I also went part-time. So I went part-time at the same time. So I have been kind of working I call it like a career portfolio career for the past almost 6 years. So yeah, a little bit different.
Oh yeah, it is, absolutely. My fiance was so jealous when I told her about that. Like massively. We're actually getting married in May as well, so it's right on the top of her agenda. Thank you.
Has she already got a dress? Because Jenny could sort her out.
She has actually, yeah. It's been altered and she's picking it up.
By now.
Yeah, she has.
Good.
It's been altered and she's picking it up next week, I think. So
wonderful.
Fingers crossed it's what she wants. So we've got a few different topics, I think, that we wanted to talk about today. So the first one is having children and a career. The second one is kind of gender pay gap. The third, kind of situations where some of you might have been disadvantaged at work for being female. And obviously because you're working tax as well, which is a pretty male dominant profession, I would say overall, how you've kind of found that and how you've all managed to still achieve success where it is male dominant. So we can kind of go through each one of those one at a time, and we'll just have a little bit of a chat about it. So shall we start off with the having children and a tax career?
So I've got two small children. They're both still at nursery, and yeah, it's hard. It's hard finding that balance of kind of succeeding in your career and succeeding at home, and it's definitely something that I've struggled with. I think when I first started my career, you've got, and it was back at PwC and then EY, you've got every year you've got your annual review, you set your objectives, you look at what the next promotion is going to be, and it's climbing that ladder, and that seems to happen. It's this hamster wheel effect, isn't it? And that seems to happen year in, year out. And I think that is the big thing that I struggled with after having my two children and coming back to work, was actually taking that time to sit down and say, actually, at this moment in time, yeah, I've got these objectives at work, but actually my overall objective at the minute in life is to be a good mum. And that's what's important to me at the minute, especially while my children are so young and, depend on me a lot. And sitting down and taking that time to say, actually, it's okay just to be, and just not to be on that hamster wheel at the minute, and just to, I enjoy my career and I enjoy what I do, but I also, for me, being a mum is the most important thing at this moment in time. And I think I'm at a place now where I'm happy with that. And who knows, maybe in a few years I might change my mind, or a few months, I don't know. But yeah, that's kind of where I am now. But it has been a struggle to get there and to kind of get to that conclusion and be happy with that conclusion.
Do you think you're a bit worried that if you were to, I don't want to say take it easy, but let's say not be so concerned with going fast with, I suppose, going up the career ladder, were you worried that it might almost not become possible if you took a break to focus more on your kids than you did at work?
Yeah, definitely, because you've all through your life you've always worked towards the next thing, so GCSEs, A-level degree, then grad scheme, so yeah, definitely I've never really taken my foot off the gas, so to speak. But I've, there's people at work here and people that I've worked with at previous firms who they've done some people haven't. I guess some people, work is still a focus, and that's great, and that's brilliant for them. But I guess I've seen it with other people who have taken that time out a little bit, or taken career breaks, and they've then made it work in the future.
Do you feel like it becomes more difficult if you have kids?
I think your priorities just change. I think that's what everyone says to you, and I don't think you necessarily appreciate until you're in that situation. So I've got a little boy who's coming up to 2. So I was basically off work for the first year of COVID, pretty much. I missed all the fun Zoom calls and all that fun. But I think, like, I've always wanted kids, and I wanted it to change my life, and I wanted it to change my perspectives, because he is the most important thing. But equally, even though people had said it, I didn't really know what that might mean and what that might feel like and what that juggle might be. But I think it's hard, because if you imagine your to-do list at work that you've got written down, and it's constantly adding with every email that comes in, you've got that mental list for home as well, which isn't being dealt with in the working day, and is pretty much probably on you, or things that are in your head that you've not yet communicated for someone else to help you with. And in the same way that delegating at work is super, super helpful once you've cracked it, I think that's true of home life as well. And it's just a balance, finding that space to be able to do that when you come back. And I really struggled with, I think when you've been out of something for so long, I think people don't always think about the impact that can have on your confidence. And the fact that kind of coming back and being out of practice and being out of touch, I'm quite a confident person, but you really, really feel that imposter syndrome when you're coming back and trying to pick up something that you've not done for a year, in the same way that you would if you were picking up, any other skill that you've not done for a long time. It just takes a while to get going. And I think that's something that's difficult to manage.
How did you tackle that then, Adele? What made it kind of easier for you?
I don't know if I did it particularly well with hindsight. So I came back. It was really well intentioned, because I'd listened. Luckily, Emily, among others, had their babies before me. So I had watched and observed and learned through them. But I suppose, again, everyone's situation's so different. So when I was coming back, I did all my keep in touch days, which were a really good thing to do, not only to help with the baby situation, but also to kind of keep in the loop with people. I would have been doing those in person if it wasn't COVID, because I think that would have really, really helped. But when I was coming back, I was coming back part-time, having previously been full-time, and I had holidays to use. So I decided to do almost a staggered return, and come back 3 days a week initially and work my way up to 4, which I thought would help me with that balance that I talked about earlier. But I think actually, while it was good for that and kind of spending more time out of work than in work, and more time with the baby than without the baby, and that was all really good, I don't think it helped my confidence in work, because it basically meant that I was very dependent on the team around me, and nothing really felt like mine when I was coming back, because there was 2 days of the 5 that I wasn't going to be around and I wasn't going to be able to help. So with hindsight, in the role that I'm in, I probably shouldn't have done that, and I should have just tagged on all the holidays at the end and just had a bit longer off or something.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, but I think it's just like everything, it's just a reassessing and trying to find the space to sit back and be like, is this actually working for me? And if it's not, what isn't working and what can I do?
Yeah.
And that's just, that's the same with anything in life, I guess.
So what's your situation now then with work? Are you still part-time, or are you now gone back to full-time?
No, I am part-time, but I just find that 4 days a week is much easier to manage than 3.
Yeah.
I know Jenny's done 3 days since she set up Honey Blossom, So she might have a different view, but just in the role that I'm in, certainly it feels easier to be away for one day than two.
Yeah.
So I'm 4 days as well. So I have Friday's my non-working day. And I think at the beginning, and this has always been a feedback point throughout my whole career, is that over-promising. And, when I first came back after my first baby, I was very much like, well, I only work 4 days, but if you need me on a Friday, you can contact me. Here's my number, or I still pick up my emails. And after I had my second baby, I've been a lot stricter, and actually, no, Friday, I will do whatever I need to do on them 4 days that I'm working. And if I need to work in the evenings, that's fine. But actually, that's it. That Friday is my day for my children, and unless the place is on fire, I don't need to be contacted. And let's face it, tax isn't, there's not really anything that will need to go in on a Friday that I'm not aware of. And I do 99% of the time will not check my emails on that day, and it's my day for my children, and I am really strict with that now.
Yeah.
And I wish in hindsight I had been the first time as well, because you get into that, you do overpromise and you do say, oh, it's fine, you can call me, and then someone does call you, but you're sat in a play centre with screaming children, and then you're making apologies for not sounding professional, and you may as well have just had the call on the Monday because it wasn't actually that important.
No, it's probably just got away in your day, and it hasn't even benefited really in many ways, probably even potentially negative, because it's potentially ruined your day off as well, hasn't it? On top of you not being able to provide, I suppose, the best quality work that you would if you were just on a normal working day.
And it's just stressful. I've learned through Emily, this was one of the main things that when I was coming back, my friends and colleagues were like, be protective of your day. That's your time. And that is one thing that so far, touch wood, is going quite well. But I think to know that call is coming, and, I know people who've said, my baby naps at this time, so I can do a call at that time. Having had a baby, well, he's never been a great napper, but I'm like, if you can actually set your clock by your baby, then you're doing really well, because I would just be, not only would you be stressed that your baby isn't asleep, you're also stressed that you've got an incoming call at any moment and your baby isn't asleep. It's a lot to manage. Yeah. And obviously for Jenny, I mean, she can't take calls. She's got brides coming in or whatever. So I think getting that separation is quite key.
Yeah. What do you think's helped for you then, Jenny, with the separation? Is it just the fact that you literally can't do anything on those days that you're not working?
I'm definitely very strict. I completely understand what Adele's saying. I think with what she does, I think that it's a real challenge, and it's admirable that she's doing it in 4 days. With what I do, because there are, the rolling deadlines, basically at the end of each month, depending on what year end your clients have, there's never really, as Emily mentioned before, there's never really anything where, something's burning to the ground, which is really desperate. I'm very lucky in that historically, in my career since I changed to part-time in 2016, that the teams have understood and got that. And so I'm definitely guilty of giving out my personal mobile number as well, but it is just given to select people so that if, the worst is happening, that they know when to get me and how to get me. And it's not I think people think a little bit more about, oh, well, I'm going to contact her and I know that she's in the shop and it's a personal number. I think that there is that thought process there. So I have been very lucky. And I am very open with all of my clients. And I tell them, these are my working days. But if you do need anything when I'm not here, then this is the team. And make sure that the team also develop relationships with the client so that, I'm never that sole point of contact with any particular client. So I think that I have been very lucky. I think that being strict is really, really important, and just setting your boundaries. I think, those days being protected is really important, but equally, for me, December is always really, really busy. And I'll put in some really long days on the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday to make sure that I can have that Thursday and Friday relatively undisturbed. And so I think there is a little bit of give and take sometimes in terms of, well, I know I'm going to be sat at my laptop at 9 o'clock at night trying to get things done on a Wednesday. But do you know what? If that means that the team is in the best place it can be whilst I'm away for 2 days, and I'm willing to do that.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Do you think there's still a bit of a taboo in the UK for men taking more responsibility for looking after kids and stuff, and that it's maybe seen as just like not even an option in their career?
I think we've been quite lucky, actually. So my husband also works in tax, and so we did shared parental leave. So we split them on my maternity, and he took time off, and did had paternity leave.
Yeah.
So I think we've actually been quite lucky, although I don't know many people that have done that. So I think my experience may be different to other people's.
Yeah.
And both Emily and Jenny's husbands work part-time, actually, don't they?
Yeah.
Okay.
They do.
Yeah. Which is
Okay.
Yeah,
interesting.
that's right.
So you actually kind of split the childcare then anyway then?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point, Jack, that you raised, because my husband works in tax as well. Adele is
Mine doesn't.
Adele doesn't. He's a bit more exciting than our husband.
What are you saying about me then?
Does your fiance work in tax?
She actually works in finance, so close enough.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
But it was really interesting when he was starting to have those conversations about working part-time, that it was almost, he had a hard time convincing his employer why he wanted to go part-time and why he would want that. And I just found it so strange, because when I talked to my employer about it, it was a very straightforward conversation. And when, in my team at that time, I had colleagues who were male who were working part-time as well. So I just felt it was a very strange kind of conversation that I had with him afterwards, where he said, actually, it didn't go as smoothly as I hoped. Mm-hmm. So I think that there definitely is still that. I think taboo is an interesting word, but it's kind of looked upon as different for men than it is for women, I think.
Yeah, and that definitely doesn't help women for their careers either, because if their husband can't go part-time, then it means, I suppose, the wife has got no choice but to do it, really, and that's just not useful for anyone, is it? Definitely probably needs to be some form of shift around that in just, I suppose, mindsets, because I suppose, as you say, really, it does seem to be easier for women to go part-time. It's almost as if it's like expected at some point when they have kids, whereas for men, it's not even really seen as a consideration, is it really?
It's definitely more unusual. What I would say is, I think male part-time working is probably overrepresented in Big Four, maybe, compared to the wider population. Because I can think of quite a few people who've either taken career breaks and I know a couple of partners that have had, solid chunks off, maybe a few months at a time, to spend. The ones I know are to spend time with kids, but I suppose it doesn't always relate to children. Obviously, Jenny's got her business, and that's a different baby for her. But so my husband doesn't work in professional services, and I literally can't think of any of his friends that have had more than 2 weeks off work.
Yeah.
And definitely none that kind of have significantly altered their working patterns as a result. I think it's much more common in professional services than elsewhere, but probably still not as common for men as for women, is my observation. Yeah.
So I suppose to kind of like wrap up this section then, I mean, have each of you got like a single tip that you can give to women who are thinking about children or have just had children to make sure that, I suppose, they still get what they want out of their career?
obviously I don't come from the children part, but obviously a lot of the time it is accompanied with part-time working. And I think that just being honest with your clients about what days you work and what the expectation is, I think is really important in terms of that whole boundary setting thing. So I think it's very easy, and we all think of it in terms of our internal teams, but it's just sometimes having the courage is maybe a little bit of a strong word, but having that conversation with your client as well.
Yeah.
I think for me, my tip would be to have a support network of other people who understand what you're going through. So I think I've been really fortunate. So kind of all my friends at work and outside of work seem to have children at the same time, and therefore we all went through the same things or similar things, similar feelings, and just being able to chat with them and tell them how you feel, even if it's that you're not feeling great, just to hear that other people are also having similar emotions to you just helps, and you can like bounce ideas off each other and suggestions. And yeah, I think that's been the thing that's helped me the most, and I didn't necessarily realize I had it at the time. It's now, as I'm talking to other people in the office who are about to go on maternity leave, that's kind of what I would say to them.
Yeah, I would echo that, and I would also say, like I said before, it's something that you can constantly review. So if anything isn't working, it's not like you've had a baby, you've agreed to do 4 days, and that's your life and that's your struggle. Like if you need to up your days again, you can have those conversations, be open about what's challenging and what's working. Be honest with yourself and be honest with other people about it, because it's not, everything doesn't always go right first time round, and that isn't a failure. That's just a fact of life, and you can change things and make it work.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think you mentioned earlier, as well, your kind of priorities changed when you had kids, and maybe you didn't quite expect that to be the case. So then I suppose it's just letting people know, isn't it, that your priorities have changed and this is what you want to focus on for the next few years or so.
Yeah, and that's okay, and that
exactly, they don't stay little forever.
So gender pay gap then. So this is not something that I've obviously personally experienced, and I don't think it happens in my firm. So I haven't really got much experience with this at all. So I think it's going to be really interesting actually to see what experiences you three have had with this. Have you had any issues with knowing or feeling like you're being paid significantly less than a male who's doing the exact same role as you?
So I was involved in the earlier years when this first came out at AO, pulling together the report, and I think gender pay is different to equal pay. Okay. So I think that's, and it's a completely different thing. And for me, not necessarily that it's not a priority. Obviously, equal pay, absolutely. I think that but gender pay, I think for me, we know what the results are going to look like across most businesses. And I think for me, the importance is not necessarily what that number is or what that ratio looks like, but more what a business is doing actually to improve that. And
okay, so just make sure I'm following there then. So when you're talking about equal pay and the difference between gender pay gap, so the gender pay gap, I imagine then you're talking about the reporting that has to be done, which comes out with a percentage at the end. Yes. But equal pay, just actually having equality of pay between men and women in the same role, doing the same jobs. Yeah. Okay. Have you, Adele or Jenny, had any experiences with equality of pay? I think that's probably a better way to put it than gender pay gap.
No, I haven't. In terms of equality of pay, I have never felt that my gender plays into a salary conversation. Definitely not. I think in terms of gender pay gap, that is that kind of evolves as a result of some of the challenges we were saying earlier around childcare and taking time out and work coming back part-time, and therefore it takes you longer to have the same amount of experiences as someone who hasn't made those choices. So I do see the gap, and I know that, within various firms there are, I think, there's kind of this similar representation at graduate level, and then, things start to tailor off, and then you see less female partners coming through. And that's something that I know that, I imagine all of the Big Four are focusing on, to try and kind of promote and push and make sure that the genders are represented at the top level, and that people aren't just kind of sitting because they don't feel like they should go for a promotion, or they don't feel like they're able to go for a promotion, or because they're part-time they don't think that you want them to be promoted, and all of those things. So I know I get the sense that that's very much where the focus is for us. But in terms of pay equality, that isn't something I've seen as an issue.
Yeah, I think you said something interesting there, though, Adele, actually, because you said about kind of salary negotiations. So it seems like you've almost taken it into your own hands to make sure that you get what you think you deserve at a certain time in your career. I think all three of you, Crosby's quite confident. So I imagine you've all done that. And do you feel like if you didn't, then it might have not been done automatically?
It's hard to know. I think it's hard because there isn't necessarily always obvious kind of banding, or obvious, if you're this level you get paid this much. But I've never had a problem with it.
Yeah, I think it was a good point you raised as well, actually, about kind of, if you go part-time, then it takes you longer to get the same experience as someone that's working full-time, and maybe you feel like you don't deserve a promotion just because you're part-time as well. So am I right in saying, Adele, that you're currently a director?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a director, yeah.
So how have you managed to, I suppose, still do that then whilst working part-time?
Well, I've been a director for quite a lot of years. So it's, to be honest, like it's something that, it's a role that I'm comfortable in and comfortable with, and know that I can do really well, and also know that I can probably do really, really well even in 4 days. So that's, like that. I mean, that hasn't been a particular challenge once I got the confidence back, having been out. But in terms of thinking about the next step, that's scary because, all the reasons I said, it's harder when you're part-time, you've got less time to do stuff, you've got other stuff to think about. And there's metrics to meet and all of that stuff that still needs to happen. So
I mean, I suppose in terms of next step, I presume you're referring to becoming partner at some point.
Yeah.
So that's on your list of aspirations?
That's on my list of aspirations, yeah.
Yeah. So how do you think then that you will go about maybe trying to achieve that then? Do you think, or what is it actually that you think might be making it more scary for you? Is it the fact that you're part-time, or is it or some other reason, I suppose?
No, I think it's just a big undertaking, isn't it? Like, if you think, at the minute, my job is a job and I'm an employee, and obviously this next step is effectively being a business owner, isn't it? That is a big shift. And if you think about how busy your life is at the minute, you have to think, do you have space for that in your life and your mental capacity, and to add to all of those lists of things that you've got? And I think that's just a challenge.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So do you feel like then, in order to become a partner, then you would have to commit more time to work than what you do now at director level?
I think the way that the processes work, I think the process itself just takes a lot of time. And I think, on top of your day job, you've kind of got to be committed to, preparing business cases and practicing interviews and speaking to, a raft of different people. And when you've only got, I don't know, 7 hours in the day and you've only got four days in the week, that is just a challenge on top of everything else. So it is something, it's on my list, and it's kind of something that like I am in discussions about, but it does, to me, it seems like a fairly kind of terrifying step.
Yeah, understandably. I mean, Jenny, have you got anything you'd like to add on the topic of equal pay?
I think obviously the firms that we work for, they all report on those types of things. I think Adele raises a great point in that there probably isn't as much transparency. Obviously, myself and my husband, we started our careers at a similar time, so we can have a conversation. But he's moved out of Big Four now, and he works in a completely different department, and we both got a senior manager at a different time, and so it's really hard to be able to figure out, well, is the equality there? But I think you asked a really good question before, Jack, about if I hadn't kind of put myself forward and had those kind of salary negotiation conversations, would I be where I am now? And I think that the answer is no.
Yeah.
So I think the kind of the pay gap reporting that we get, it's good to see the numbers come down in terms of that gap, both from a gender perspective as well as from an ethnic perspective. But it's really hard, because they are very high level numbers. You don't get down into the detail. It can be difficult to know whether you as an individual are kind of being treated differently to someone who you might be sat next to, as an example.
Yeah. I tell you, I definitely didn't expect you all to tell me that you never felt this was an issue for you guys, particularly because of kind of how big of a thing it's been in the news over like the past few years and stuff. So, but I think probably the key takeaway for people is basically have the confidence and have those negotiations, and don't let it become an issue by doing nothing about it.
Yeah. And I think just to add on that, so when I was looking at kind of moving from Big Four to come in-house, and you'd look at job descriptions, and there'd be a kind of salary up to whatever, and then a recruiter would be like, well, what are your salary expectations? It's having that confidence to say, well, that top number, if it says a job up to X, quite like that X amount, please.
Yeah.
It's
funny, I side rant, like when people don't put salary bands or some form of range on a job description.
Yeah.
Such a frustration.
Yeah. And if that's the range, I'll have the
top, please.
Please.
Just a reminder that you can book a free career coaching chat with the Tax Recruitment Company by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/free career chat. The Tax Recruitment Company can help you decide what's best for you and your career. So, next topic I've got noted down then is situations where any of you have been disadvantaged or feel like you've been disadvantaged at work for being female. Have any of you got like particular experiences with this, do you think, or a particular example that comes to mind?
When we spoke before, I was talking about, so at the moment, I've left EY, I'm about to start Deloitte in May, but I'd been looking for a role for a period of time. And as happens with everyone who works in this kind of industry, you get contacted by recruiters all the time. There's this fabulous opportunity. We think you'd be great for it. Oh, okay, great. Yeah, that sounds interesting, because I was looking at the time, and going with all of the things that we were saying before about being open and honest. The first thing that I would say is, just so that you're aware, I do work part-time. My days need to be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and for me, that's a non-negotiable. Is your client still open to speaking to me? The number of responses which I received back, which were, no, they're looking for a full-time person, without understanding my experience, without understanding, what kind of client base that I work with, how I handle 3 days a week, all that type of thing, was incredible. And that had a real impact on my confidence, to the point where I felt quite desperate about the situation. And so I, when you're in this kind of world after a few years and you're involved with recruitment for the various firms that you're with, and you build relationships with certain recruitment consultants. And I did speak to one of them where I felt like I had a strong enough relationship with her just to kind of put my cards on the table and just explain to her, this is a scenario that I'm getting right now. Is it really like that out there? Is there no hope for me as a part-timer, to be able to secure a role somewhere else? And it was really interesting speaking to her, because I could tell immediately that she had the experience in working with people that were part-time. And within, a few weeks, I had 4 interviews lined up. Mm-hmm. And one recruiter did agree to speak to me when I pushed back, and I said, I'm really concerned about the amount of recruitment consultants that are coming back to me and saying, no, they're looking for full-time when you don't understand the extent of the experience I have. He did actually have a call with me and put me through the process after understanding more about my how I work and what my experience was. And I feel like actually if I wouldn't have pushed him, then he would never have had that conversation. And I was offered that opportunity, which in the end I didn't take. But it was a really interesting time, because I've never really seen it as something that would impact my career until I was essentially being told, no, you're not good enough because you work part-time. And that really made me think about all the other people in my network who are mums or, work part-time for a different reason, my husband included. Actually, is this a real problem? And I think, there's lots of people that work part-time, right? And but there's no shadow of a doubt that the majority of people that work part-time are women. And I felt like if this is the response that people are getting, then there's a lot of skill and a lot of talent out there which is not being put in the right place, because for whatever reason, part-timers aren't viewed the same as people that work full-time. And that was quite hard for me to kind of swallow.
Would you say the problem is that people feel like they're looking for someone that's full-time? They feel like they need someone to work that amount of time, and so they disregard part-time almost immediately because of that?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting. I don't know what Adele and Emily think about this, but I find that working 3 days, compared to when I was working full-time, I'm way more focused. Like a laser focus. I know all the stuff that I've got to get through, and I just get through it before the end of the week. And so I think that there is maybe a lack of appreciation of, I'm not saying in all cases, but I feel like, I appreciate that some businesses will be looking for full-time people, but maybe consider the fact that you could end up with 1 or 2 part-time people, which could gain you everything that you need. And in fact, you get 2 new team members that could bring 2 lots of experience to the role, as an example. But it's just the being told no without kind of any exploration, which I think is the worst thing, because it may be actually, I understand that does sound like a full-time role. Thanks, but no thanks, and we can move on. But it's just the thought of, actually, you don't know what my experience is and what my track record is in terms of how I perform against full-timers before you've even made that decision, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And actually, I think it was a good point you said about potentially getting 2 part-timers. And let's say you got 2 part-timers working 5 days combined. By the sounds of it, if they're all as laser focused as you on those days, you're going to get more out of them over the full 5 days than you would just a single person.
Definitely.
I wouldn't want to say in all cases, but
Yeah, but definitely they've done all those studies, haven't they? In, is it Sweden? And people are more efficient if they do 4 days. That's why they've moved to that standard working model of 4 longer days, because they've found productivity didn't drop. So if you've got 2 people who are focused, like Jenny says, as they come in, then that just makes sense. And it is disappointing that it's just a straight off no from some people, and that feels like quite an old-fashioned approach to want someone in the office 5 days a week. You know, if there's anything the last 2 years has shown, is that isn't needed.
Yeah. So have you actually had the same experience then when looking for part-time roles?
So when I came back to AO, I came back part-time here. I think it's probably different for me in-house, but just to echo what Jenny said, no, when I came back part-time, none of my responsibilities got taken away from me. I still have the same tax filing requirements, I still do exactly the same job. I just have to focus in 4 days. I just make less brews for the team now, to be honest.
Get more made for you instead.
Yeah.
Okay, now that makes sense. I mean, are there any other situations you think then that you feel like you've been disadvantaged, or would you say part-time is the only?
So, and again, when we were talking about this earlier, I think, and definitely at the beginning of my career, I've had comments said to me like, oh, you don't look like you would work in tax, or you don't look like you would work in finance. And, and Adele, we've spoken about this so many times, and what's potentially meant as a compliment, or, meant in a nice way, like, we're not old, white, grey men.
Yeah.
Actually, and particularly when I was younger and inexperienced, it contributed massively to imposter syndrome. And if you walked into a client meeting and they're all men, feeling like that you shouldn't be part of that table, and shouldn't be there, and feeling in even in introductions, when you introduce yourself, feeling whether people take you seriously. I guess I think as I've got older and more confident and had children, and therefore don't really have time to have imposter syndrome, kind of try to own it a little bit more. And do you know what? Yeah, I am. This is me. I can do tax. I also like to have a good time, and outside of work, and just, I guess, build your brand in the way that you want to build it, and staying true to yourself.
Yeah, it's a weird comment, isn't it, that you don't look like you should work in tax, because what does someone who works in tax look like?
I know.
Yeah. I got similar things about uni, because I did maths at uni, and people automatically assume that every person that does maths at uni is a bloke, but it was actually 50-50 split between male and female.
I did maths at uni as well.
Yeah. Did you have the same experience as me?
Also, don't look like I did maths at uni, apparently.
Was your experience the same?
It was nowhere near as male heavy. It probably wasn't 50-50, but it wasn't. Yeah, I don't think it was what the stereotypes would presume it was.
It goes to show that comments like that really have absolutely no basis, like, at all, do they?
Yeah.
And actually, it sounds like it had a negative impact on you as well, Emily, with your confidence in particular.
Absolutely, definitely.
Yeah, and when people are saying it thinking it's a compliment in some way, actually it's doing the complete opposite. So that's definitely useful to know. I suppose it goes to show it's the person who's receiving it whose perception is important, and not the person who's giving it. Have you guys had the same type of comment as well? Have you through work as well?
Oh yeah, I've always looked quite young as well, which I don't think helps. But I've consistently had things like that.
Shall we move on to being in a male dominant profession then, and still achieving success? So I think it's already been alluded to a few times, particularly with the comments that you've all received about you don't look like you should work in tax. But I suppose, how have you coped with that then, and how has it kind of made you, I suppose, feel knowing that you are in a male dominant profession?
I think I definitely feel almost, sometimes I can feel a lot of pressure or like responsibility to call things out, because I'm very aware of my rest of my team and the more the newer members of the team coming through, and the importance of being a role model. And so it's taken time for me to be able to feel comfortable enough to say, actually, that could have been done better. That wasn't quite what I expected. That isn't quite in line with what we should be representing as a team or as a firm. And so I probably carry that responsibility with me a little bit, because I think when I started my career, I did see some more senior women taking that role, and I think that's an important responsibility that I've kind of taken forward in my career. But I appreciate it's not always easy to have those conversations, and so I think in terms of how I deal with it is just kind of, I see myself sometimes as a bit of a well, I will call these things out, but it's not to kind of beat you up. It's just to try and make you realize the impact that these things might be having. And it can be really frustrating, because there's only so many times that you can hear, it wasn't intentional, it wasn't my fault, that decision was made without me being involved. That's really frustrating. But I feel as if I don't raise those points, then nothing's ever going to change. So I guess I definitely feel a responsibility. I don't know, Adele, Emily, whether you feel the same, but that's something that as I've grown up through my career, I've felt more and more of.
Yeah, like the automatic need to take that responsibility on board to point out things where maybe things are said wrongly that could be seen as almost disadvantaging women or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it can be something really simple, like there was one example a few years ago when there was a big team meeting, and we're at the team that I was last in, the team of 100 people, there was maybe 7 people that spoke on the call, and all 7 people were male. And when I brought it up with a partner afterwards, he said, well, it wasn't intentional, but I do take your point. And then in the next team meeting, that didn't happen. And so I felt like, okay, well, maybe someone has taken something on board somewhere. But it's just the little things where actually, as in that kind of environment of 100 people where there's no representation from women, you can feel like an outsider. And I wouldn't want that for the rest of the women in my team.
It's similar for you two as well, then, Emily and Adele.
Yeah, I think so. I think I work in a transaction environment as well. So that is traditionally very male dominated. And for a long time, I was regularly the only woman in a room and things like that. I'm probably the most junior as well, which doesn't help in terms of the speaking up. But I think as I've got more senior and I've got more people in my team that you kind of feel a responsibility for, you have to try and move the dial a little bit. But I think if I compare my experiences now compared to when I joined 11 years ago, and just everyone else's view of the world and everyone else's kind of openness to diversity and openness to equality, it's a different place. Like it's so much better than it was. I'm not saying that everything is perfect, and obviously it comes down to individuals and their experiences, and if their experiences aren't right, then that needs to be fixed. But it's definitely come a long way in the last 10 years, I would say.
Yeah. Is there anything that you think then, like when you think of something that clearly hasn't been properly kind of fixed yet, does anything spring to mind, Adele, that still needs to be dealt with?
No, I don't. Nothing that's kind of revolutionary that no one's thought of. I think, like I said earlier, I think what needs to happen, and it's not just in Big Four, it's not just in accounting, it's kind of across the board, and obviously there is a focus on this, but you need senior women at all levels in all industries, on boards, with proper executive roles. This is not a box ticking exercise. It's leveling the playing field for everyone. So yeah, everyone is aware of that, and there's kind of government intervention and things like that. So things will happen and things are happening. It's just because the change needs to come at such a high level, it takes a long time to work its way through. You need that sponsorship from an early point in your career, and it takes time to get to the basically the pinnacle where you are going to be filling those exec roles and those partner roles and all of that.
Yeah. Do you feel like then now there's got to be a shift to kind of having more of a 50-50 split, say, partners in a big four firm across women and men?
Well, there should be. I mean, if there's 50-50 graduate entrants, there should be 50-50 partners.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If it was always 75% male, female entering the profession, that's different.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see how you can comfortably explain at entrant level having equality and that not being represented all the way through. That feels uncomfortable for me.
Yeah.
I suppose like what you're saying then, Adele, really, because let's say it was only 10 years ago when the split was 50-50 coming in, and that's when the kind of the drive started around equality and stuff. You've got to wait for that time, haven't you, for those people to then be experienced enough and have the skills to come all the way through. Yeah.
Exactly that. So it's not a quick fix, but there has to be a bit of kind of a focus on it, and making sure that if there is a reason for, whether it's women, whether it's kind of different ethnic groups, if there's a reason why they're not achieving a promotion at a certain level, fixing that and giving them a leg up to be able to achieve that, just so that the playing field is level.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I think, Jack, I take your point around, it does take time. But what I was talking to both Emily and Adele about before this call was, when I finally got in touch with the right recruiters, I was interviewed by 5 firms. Of those 5 firms, 4 of the interviews were with men. And then the role that I eventually took with Deloitte, I was interviewed by all women. And that made me feel like, actually, this is possible. And it's clear in this example that this is possible without just waiting, if that makes sense. So I think that there are examples out there, but it could just always be better, couldn't it?
Yeah, it could. I think it's right anyway, though, Jenny, coming back to what you said much earlier about kind of, you feel like you have the responsibility to call things out. So it's obviously not, I suppose, nice that you feel automatically like that responsibility sits with you and it's not kind of spread and stuff. But I think the only thing you can do to try and change the situation is to call things out, isn't it, when you see it? Because kind of before we had this chat anyway, I kind of mentioned how naive I think I am on this subject, and I could do something without realizing the effect that it has on someone. And the only way to fix that, I suppose, is by pointing it out. I would never have known before this conversation, either, Emily, about kind of how the comments about not looking like you work in tax would knock your confidence. That would have never have crossed my mind before being told about it today.
Yeah, and I'm sure the people who made the comments, they weren't trying to be offensive, and they definitely wouldn't have been trying to knock my confidence. But
it's there and it happens, and the only way that they know is if they're told about it.
Yeah.
And it's that inside or outsider thing again. Well, you don't look like you work in tax can make you feel like, well, do I not belong in this environment? Yeah. And there's nothing worse than that.
Yeah. No, see, mate, when you explain it like that, it just makes perfect sense. But like 99% of people are not even going to go through that thought process, are they? And they're just going to say something flippantly, probably.
It is really hard. But I think conversely, I like being the different person in the room. I like being memorable. Like, there aren't that many little blonde girls skipping around talking about transactions. And if that's what if then when you need to talk to someone about tax on a transaction, you remember a blonde girl from ages ago skipping around and talking really high pitched and sounding really young, and you remember my name, that's fine. So like there are pros to being different. I mean, I'm being really flippant there and joking, but there are real pros, and it almost like helps you differentiate yourself sometimes by not being what people necessarily expect.
And you've always been really good at that, Adele, at kind of building that as your brand. I think it depends what type of person you are. And definitely for me at the beginning of my career, I did struggle with it. And it's only as I said before, as I've got older and don't care as much now that, actually, no, I am here. This is my job. I do it really well. There we go.
Yeah. And I'm serious and I know what I'm doing.
Yeah. I was speaking to somebody a couple of weeks about something, actually the same point, and he was in a room with, I think, 20 other CEOs, and there was only one person in the room who was female, and she got an OBE, and she used the fact that she was a female and, put herself forward and put herself in uncomfortable situations, and actually that was her brand, and that's how she, ultimately got the OBE. And it's silly.
Yeah, I really like this point.
Used
actually.
It for herself.
Yeah. Use your uniqueness for whatever reason it is to your advantage. Yeah, it's a good point. Anything you'd like to add, Jenny?
I think that both Emily and Adele are right in that it can definitely help. So when this is a completely different example, but when I got married, my husband has quite a generic British name, and I didn't take it. I've gone double-barreled outside of work, but actually, in terms of my tax career, I've kept my maiden name, just solely because it's quite short, it's quite snappy. People often remember it. Working in R&D, I often get that. Did you know that AU is a chemical symbol for gold? It's like, yeah. But yeah, it's something that people remember about you. And I know I haven't got, I've dialed in my phone, but it was something that Adele said before. Like my hair's always a different colour. And she was like, oh, well, you don't look like a tax advisor either because you're the girl with blue hair, but people do remember that. So, I think that there is definitely something about being, visually the different person in the room. Might be a name that's different to everybody else's name, but there is some advantage to it. That if you can make it work for you, then use it, because I think that we've all been told throughout our careers that you have to kind of identify your uniqueness and build on your strengths. So I think that that's a really, really good point, Adele, that you brought up.
Yeah, I think even for me as well, it's not the same, I suppose, as it is for you guys, but because I think I've got kind of a bit of a quirky personality, and I try not to keep that outside of work, because actually it helps me to build relationships with people, because it makes the conversations and stuff more enjoyable for me particularly, and hopefully for other people as well. And those who like that will remember it, as they will for you guys showing your unique traits as well.
Yeah.
Am I right in thinking all of you are part of Women in Tax?
Yeah.
So if people want to get involved in that, how can they do that?
Yeah, so there's so at the minute, so we're part of the Northwest network. So that started off, the network used to be quite thriving, and then obviously kind of COVID hit and the events just went away. So at the minute I think we've been going again for 6 months. There's a LinkedIn page called Women in Tax. I think it's Women in Tax Manchester or Women in Tax Northwest. And you can kind of join the group, and we post everything in there that we do. So we do a diverse range of activities. So we did a walk in Manchester in September, kind of like a guided walk. and then went for drinks afterwards. We've had we've done a couple of events for charity, so a brilliant breakfast, and we've got a few more events planned this year along a similar theme. Yesterday we had a life coach, a kind of a 90-minute webinar by this life coach, which was, well, I cried, to be honest. Shock. It was really good. Yeah, in a good way when I say cried, yeah. But it did get quite deep and emotional. And so, yes, I would just say go onto the LinkedIn page, and you'll be able to hear about the events on there.
Yeah, I think sorry. Go on, sorry, you go.
I was just going to say we're joining with Leeds as well, I think. So rather than keeping the events separate like Manchester, Leeds, we're going to try and do things together, because a lot of the events now are going to be online, or a lot of the webinars are online, and yeah. Yeah,
because I think it's a point you said earlier about kind of having, I suppose, a network that you can go to when you've got questions or you're having issues and stuff, and people who go into the same things. I think that's an easy way for other women who work in taxes to talk to other women that work in tax at the same time, and women in tax definitely facilitates that, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Massive thank you to Emily, Adele and Jenny. I felt a bit like a fish out of water going into this episode, but all three of them were great, and this was probably the most enjoyable episode I've ever done. I'll have quite a few times actually when editing this one. To find out more about these amazing guests, head on over to the show notes for this episode at taxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP44, and a link is in there to each of their LinkedIn profiles. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe or sign up for email notifications to make sure you don't miss out on any future episodes. The emails will give you a brief summary of each episode, which are bi-weekly and are released on Mondays. But that's it for this episode. I hope you liked the episode and have taken away some useful points to help you to progress, develop and improve your tax career. Until next time.